You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Sick of those trivia podcasts that you don't even understand how to operate and they just have too many levers and buttons?
There's got to be a better way.
Now there is, with Good Job Brain, an offbeat quiz show and trivia podcast that makes learning new things easy and fun.
I just learned that artificial vanilla flavoring sometimes comes from the anal glands of a beaver, and now I can never shake that mental image. Thanks, Good Job Brain.
Good Job Brain is available for the low price of just 4 easy payments of free. It's a podcast.
Good Job Brain is part of Airwave Media and available on all podcast apps. Operators are standing by.
Hold your ears, folks. It's showtime.
People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off.
Turn it off.
Welcome to the projection booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me once again is Ms. Beth Accomando.
Thank you. Looking forward to this.
Also back in the booth is Mr. Mike Malloy.
Wearing cowboy boots today, but then again, I wear cowboy boots every day.
Spaghetti Western Month continues with a look at Sergio Sollima's 1966 film, The Big Gundown. It's the story of Jonathan Corbett, played by Lee Van Cleef, a bounty hunter who is being wooed to run for the U.S. Senate. He's asked to pursue the criminal Cuchillo, played by Tomas Milian, who's been accused of raping and murdering a 12-year-old girl. Things aren't quite as simple as that. We will be spoiling the film as we go along, so if you haven't seen The Big Gundown, go watch it and come back. We'll still be here. So, Beth, when was the first time you saw The Big Gundown, and what did you think?
I don't remember specifically when I saw it. I remember being a teenager and growing up near the Vogue Theater in San Diego and seeing films like Duck You Sucker and Fistful of Dollars, and it all kind of was a blur at a certain point. So I'm not sure when I saw it, but I do know that I really fell in love with these spaghetti westerns because they were they were so appealing. They were over the top, and they had this weird quality of being foreign and also being American at the same time. And I remember kind of that was a little confusing to me as a kid at that point, because there would be stars like James Coburn and Rod Steiger and something like Duck You Sucker, and yet it had this Italian director. And I mean, I was into films at that time, but I was more into like old Hollywood movies because that's what my dad liked. And spaghetti westerns were kind of this odd bridge to something else because they very much referenced old Hollywood, but they were something very new. So I just have this kind of general memory of spaghetti westerns without clearly defining moments between each film. So it's kind of this blur.
And how about you, Mike?
I really lucked out because at age 19, I got the book deal to write Lee Van Cleef's biography. I was a 19-year-old college student in Alabama. Domestically, there was no way to see The Big Gundown on home video at the time. My only hope was during my one-year writing period between 1995 and 1996, I just had to hope and pray that it screened on TV at some point during that period. And thank goodness, January 9th, 1996, you remember when American cable broadcaster TNT used to, for Lee Van Cleef's birthday or John Wayne's birthday, they would show an appropriate movie? Well, they showed The Big Gundown at 2 a.m. on Lee Van Cleef's birthday, so I really lucked out.
You were 19 when you got that book deal?
Stephen Crane and Red Badge of Courage aside, I don't really recommend 19-year-olds write books, not professionally. Their frontal lobe hasn't even developed yet. This is a very significant film to me because Lee Van Cleef, that book deal, that launched my career in film. And then years later, as a screenwriter, the other lead of the film, Tomas Milian, he signed letters of interest to appear in 2 westerns that Eric Zaldivar and I co-wrote. They never got produced, and then Tomas left us in 2017, but it was a giant vote of confidence that he did that. And so, again, the 2 leads of this movie I have a connection to, and it's a very significant film to me.
I can't remember when I saw this. I think, though, when I did see it, it was probably maybe like a Video Search of Miami type of deal, or because it was definitely on VHS, and it was one of these things that was kind of cobbled together because famously this film has multiple versions of it, and I think I saw the 110-minute version, which is, as far as I know, the longest version of it. And it was one of those, and I kind of revisited it last night, where you would go along with English dialogue, and then you would drop out into Italian dialogue for a while, then go back to English. But for me, I like it that way because then I get to see what's in one version versus what's in another. So it was very interesting to try to put my mind in that space where I'm watching it going, okay, so this wasn't in the version that Americans saw. That's interesting. And just to see how things were cut and to try to figure out how people were perceiving these characters in this American version versus the international version. I think that the American version was rather butchered, missing, 15 minutes of stuff? And really, any time that you miss even a frame of Lee Van Cleef, you're missing too much. And there's so much stuff, even from the beginning of this movie, that incredible opening scene where you've got the 3 guys coming up this mountain and they're looking for their connection, and there's Lee Van Cleef just waiting for them, and they think at first that he's the connection, and then no, the connection is the guy that's hanging over there. I'm the guy that you thought was behind you. Here I am in front of you, and I'll give you a fighting chance, though. Here's 3 bullets for your guns. And I love the way he lines up these bullets on this log, and you get that amazing shot of the 3 men with the 3 bullets right in front of them. So nice. And the movie just goes on from there, just being framed and shot so wonderfully.
Being Italian and Catholic, the number 3 and the Holy Trinity, and there's always Catholicism in these films in weird and twisted ways, I think. And that's part of, I think, what I enjoy about them, because they elevate what the American Westerns were. There's always this twin sense of this weird Catholicism and this weird kind of operatic sensibility. I just remember in Django, they had what were supposed to be the Klan, and instead of the white hoods, they were all wearing these red hoods and scarves. It's that's so over the top. It is like, why? Because it looks better. It looks more striking to be riding down the hill in those red hoods as opposed to those bland white ones. Yeah, I always like, and there's always somebody's getting crucified, but I love that sense, that sense of this tormented Catholicism that's somewhere lurking in these films that kind of just gives it an extra edge of, those notions of redemption and sin and whatever.
Well, we should give a shout out to a guy named Franco Cleef. He was the one that cobbled together that, back before it was commercially available in this country, he was the one that put together that longer version, and it was available through the tape traders. I was living in LA at the time, and Eddie Brandt's Saturday Matinee was a rental place, and they had a certain behind the counter collection that they couldn't commercially, rent you, but you could borrow at no cost. And so that's how I saw the Franco Cleef 110-minute version. I have to totally disagree. Maybe it's my bias of having seen the 90-some-odd minute cut first, and you just fall in love with, the first version you see is the one you tend to fall in love with. As much as I love spaghetti westerns, one of my least favorite things, and I know I'm in the minority, is the pageantry of gunfights. I just gravitate towards the realism, and, I just don't need to see a bunch of pageantry in the gunfights. So I prefer and the only way I'm able to get that cut, Grindhouse Leasing did an amazing 4-disc Blu-ray set. But the only way I'm able to see the cut that I fell in love with, fortunately, I found the Japanese DVD, which has that cut.
I was watching that 110-minute cut on the Grindhouse release that you're talking about, and it is all dubbed in Italian. And so that was the thing. I was just like, no. I want to hear Lee Van Cleef say as much with his own voice as I possibly can. And I don't care if everybody else is dubbed. Everybody else is dubbed anyway, whether they're being dubbed in Italian or whether they're being dubbed in English. So just give me that. So I ended up having to go back and watch the bootleg rather than watch the Grindhouse version. I mean, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous print. They did such a great job. Beth, you're talking about the Trinity that comes up, and the one thing that always cracks me up is that Lee Van Cleef, famous for being in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, where I believe, and please correct me, that he is the bad, but when it came to advertising this movie, all over the place, it was Mr. Ugly is back, which, as an actor, I might be a little offended by. I'm not sure.
I know it gets confusing because of the way they list it on the poster and then in the movie. But yeah, because it got confused and then I got confused, I'm not sure where the original is. But yes, I think he's supposed to be the bad and Eli Wallach is the ugly, which makes a lot more sense. But he's just Angel Eyes.
Back when I was writing the book, I went looking through the old newspaper microfilm. I found the old newspaper ads and there's all, Mr. Ugly comes to town. And most hilariously is that one city, I can't remember where, St. Louis or somewhere, had a Mr. Ugly contest where, you could win, I don't know, the ugliest guy or something, won free tickets or something, predicated on this being totally inaccurate, that Van Cleef was the bad and not the ugly. It's just hilarious that they made such a hoopla. But MGM and United Artists were the main importers of spaghetti westerns as far as the studios went, but this was Columbia. And they made a big deal of it. And I found newspaper ads. They brought it in 68 or 69. It was released in 66 in Italy, but they brought it over to America in 68 or 69. And I've seen newspaper ads all the way up to 73 where it was still playing in America.
Well, it's a really compelling film, and I really like the way that this whole film is set up, that we have, after this opening and after that incredible credit sequence, which has just, personally, I like the version with lyrics, even though the singer is a little over the top, let's say. And my wife was just like, get this screeching harpy off of the television.
I remember showing this film to my brother, and the title sequence comes up, and he says, I guess they couldn't afford that Morricone guy for this one. And I was like, this is one of his most celebrated soundtracks. What are you talking about?
Maybe I prefer the one without the lyrics to the song, but definitely I don't mind hearing them with the lyrics, even though...
Oh, no, the lyrics are great. There's something about hearing those that is just, it just throws you into it. And yeah, I love them.
But I love this whole idea of Van Cleef going to this, actually, even before we see him arrive at this party, that great tableau that we have of the other family that we're being introduced to, and that we get to see, father, mother, daughter, son-in-law, and then over to the side is his bodyguard. And I absolutely love the actor that plays the bodyguard. We talked a little bit about him on the Sabata episode where he shows up, and even though he's in the third Sabata film, they don't really play up as much in that film as they do in this film. Just how much, and this could just be me, but just how much he and Van Cleef look alike in some aspects. Maybe it's the haircut, maybe it's the nose, but when they are having their little confrontation later on in the film where they're talking about what it's like to be a gunfighter, and he's really trying to impress Van Cleef of like how scientific he is about his new holster and all these things, and that he always watches the eyes and not the hands. It really felt like it was almost a mirror image talking these two guys together.
The real look-alike was in the bull scene. That's Romano Pupo. The only guy with a mustache but no beard in the bull scene is Romano Pupo, and he was Lee Van Cleef's stunt double. If you wonder why Romano Pupo is in so many Van Cleef films, that's why. And also in the bull scene at the Widow's Ranch, and I know we're jumping ahead, but also in that scene is Benito Stefanelli, and he was another big stunt coordinator. Not only stunt man, but stunt coordinator, and those guys naturally just got speaking parts in these spaghetti westerns too.
And really, that opening scene is where we get stuff set up. We have Van Cleef at this party. We've got this guy, Broxton, who's like, hey, you should really run for Senate, and I'll buy your campaign, and I'll put up all this money. And basically, you'll be in my pocket once you become a senator, but I really want this to happen. And these two guys, the McCoy brothers, show up at this party, and they're like, hey, this girl was raped and murdered. And right away, there's a close-up on this son-in-law, and it's like, okay, something's not right. But luckily, it isn't too ham-fisted the way that we're handed this. I mean, they do try to keep the mystery up a little bit through this film. I think it's only really on the second viewing or third viewing that you're like, oh, well, of course, that's why they did that close-up. But otherwise, it was just like more of a reaction shot.
You don't really trust those brothers. I mean, just look at them.
Oh, their very natural red hair that they have.
They just don't look trustworthy.
They definitely don't. But yeah, they tell the story of how Cuchillo, this Mexican bandito, is the one that actually raped and murdered this girl. And now it's up to Broxton's like, hey, this will really help with your campaign here, Corbett, if you go out and track this guy down, basically just setting him up. And hey, you'll take care of this problem for me, and everything will be absolutely fine. And yeah, rather than get a whole posse together, we've got a one-man posse right here, Sheriff. Jonathan Corbett will take care of this problem for us. And we quickly learn that Corbett maybe is a little outmatched by Cuchillo.
Even though this guy is offering him, I'm going to pay for your campaign and blah, 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 you know that Corbett is not buying 100% into this because he says, I'm interested in progress. I'm not interested in your personal profit. And you know right from the beginning that this is a guy who is completely like his own and doesn't really care what anybody else thinks or wants. And he's kind of like, yeah, I'll go for this. But you know that that's not a contract that's binding to him, like that he's going to go his own way if he decides that this guy doesn't fit what he thinks he wants. And so I really like that they're almost talking at cross purposes where, Braxton is saying stuff and he's like, oh yeah, now I got this guy in my pocket. He's going to take care of my problems. And Corbett's kind of like, yeah, I'm going to be doing my own thing. And if there are motives and, needs happen to cross, fine. But if they part ways, forget it. One of the things I really love about the film is it opens and you're in this Western setting and you feel like, to me, I feel like I'm in an Italian spaghetti Western. And then you go to the plantation and suddenly you're like reminded like, oh, wait a minute, we are supposed to be in America and the South. And the thing I love about these spaghetti Westerns is they occupy this weird kind of surreal landscape of being Italian and American and someplace entirely different from both, all at the same time. And it's kind of bizarrely magical in a way.
That scene is particularly surreal because there may be another spaghetti Western expert that knows better than I, but I can think of no other scene in a spaghetti western shot on a soundstage, but meant to be an exterior. Sure, yeah, I'm sure they have shot, saloon scenes and stuff on sound stages at Cinecittà and stuff, but that is meant to be an exterior, and it's shot on a soundstage, and, they've built a little garden and stuff like that. I mean, I think it has that maybe distinction in all of spaghetti western cinema.
I'm so glad you said that, because I was like, this looks like a soundstage, but I can't really tell for sure if it is, because there were some shots where I was like, well, I don't know, that greenery looks like it's pretty real, but then at the same time, maybe they just dug up some trees and just planted them right there on the soundstage.
But, that also harkens back to these referencing American Westerns as well. It plays on so many kind of things in your cultural memory of, if you watched old American Westerns from the 50s, some of those were shot on sound stages, including exteriors, and they had a certain look to them.
My VHS of The Searchers, it was matted improperly, and you can actually see the soundstage lights at the top of the campfire scene. It
just adds to that whole quality, the unique quality of spaghetti westerns for me. Because they occupy, like I said, they just occupy this interesting space of not being any one thing and kind of crossing all these boundaries. And it's one of the things I really love about them.
And we're almost giving the filmmakers too much credit for all this stuff, because this is grinded out cinema. This is, the film made without live sound and just ground out to, the Italians. They didn't have TV until the late 70s, and they went to the movies 4 times a week. They treated it like we treated TV. So they just had to grind out movies, and they were so much more prolific than Hollywood. In loving American Westerns and almost slavishly wanting to recreate them, they came out with something that was entirely different. They demented the American Western through their own specific type of machine and just cranked out some product that was totally different. But I don't even know how much was intentional.
I mean, it shows how smart they were, too, because there's this sense Italy's coming out of the war and their industry being completely devastated and trying to reboot the industry in the 50s and 60s. And you get this sense of okay, they've imported the American Western, they've reimagined it on their own terms, then exported it back out to America, and they've created this product that in Italy looks like a foreign film coming from America, and then to Americans, it's meant to look like an American film made in their own country, and yet it's got this different quality. So it just has these clever layers to it that are unintentional.
Another layer when the American revisionist movement starts aping the spaghetti westerns, yeah.
I mean, to have Tomas Milian, who's Cuban-American. I know he studied with Strasberg, and he's playing this Mexican bandito, Cuchillo, who I like that we don't get to know him very well at first, and that he's very much just this, we talk a little bit in A Bullet for the General about the trickster character from Italy, and he's very much this trickster character where, it is honestly like a cartoon at times. The very first time that Corbett confronts Cuchillo, when Cuchillo's getting a shave, and Corbett goes over and he's about to apprehend him, and this little guy in a sombrero just walks past and he's just like, hey, how's it going? And moves past, and he's supposed to be the barber, but no, it's actually the barber in the chair, and it's just this kind of really impossible to have been done type of thing, other than if it was Bugs Bunny doing it. And I was just like, yeah, that works really well. And Cuchillo, throughout so much of this, is basically a cartoon character quite a bit of the time.
Well, and I love the contrast that you get between Milian and Van Cleef, because Van Cleef is so kind of still and laconic and barely moves, and Milian is just running circles around him and bouncing off of walls. And part of what makes the film so enjoyable is that physical contrast between the two of them.
When you think about it, Lee Van Cleef gets the info that Cuchillo is in the barber's chair. He gets the info from an old man, and the old man has been slashed in the face. Now, the movie wants you to gradually be like Cuchillo and gradually, shift your opinion on him and think, but when you watch it multiple times, you're like, hey, this guy still is slashing old men in the face. Also, when Lee Van Cleef in a later scene gets shot by the young Mormon girl, Cuchillo is just laughing maniacally, thinking that Van Cleef has been killed. This is the time that the audience is supposed to still think that Cuchillo is just an absolute cretin, but, again, on multiple viewings, he's still doing these things.
Yeah, that whole scene with the Mormon clan is very, very interesting. And I really like how they're kind of pulling the wool over our eyes when it comes to him getting the information, Corbett getting the information that Cuchillo is down by the river with this 13-year-old girl. So he immediately just jumps to like, oh my God, she's going to get raped and murdered, and just bolts out there. And the way that they play the scene, the way that Cuchillo is just like, hey, come on in the water, hey. And he's just really like extra pervy with this 13-year-old girl. I really like how they're manipulating us with that. And then I also really like the payoff to that scene, which is when the Mormon guy's like, oh no, this is my daughter. This is my fourth wife. That's nice. That's really good.
Yeah, I thought that was a great payoff.
Cuchillo manages to get him shot by the Mormon girl. I mean, Lee Van Cleef just gets abused constantly through this film. I mean, I compared him to Bugs Bunny, but it's almost Tom and Jerry-esque with how often we think that Tom's just about to catch Jerry and ends up with a head shaped like a frying pan, you know? Though I guess Cuchillo kind of gets it back a little bit in that absolutely bizarre scene when he goes to the woman's ranch, and this woman who's like a spider in a web and has, or more like, I think they call her a queen bee, and she's got all of her drones outside, and she just looks through a window at all the drones and what they're doing and the way that they fight and play. I mean, it's really kind of twisted. It's like all of these guys just doing all of these things to impress her and hopefully end up being the one that spends the night in her bed. And wow, what an amazing sequence this is.
You know, there's a lot of gothic touches in spaghetti westerns, and this would be the gothic touch in The Big Gundown, the lone gothic touch, I guess. Very glad that Lee Van Cleef did not bed down with Susan Scott or Naves Navarro's character, because we would have just hated him when he coldly left at the end of that sequence, but would have actually understood, I think. But I'm still glad that he recognized what was going on.
Well, and it's also an interesting female character that you get, because so often, I mean, a lot of these women, they end up getting raped or killed or just hanging on to a male character. But, she's at least she's a little like a femme fatale character where she's kind of controlling her own world without a whole lot of morality going on. But she's at least got a certain amount of control and is manipulating people in a way that a lot of the other female characters don't get to do. But in the end, she's still left on her knees begging for some man to stay and protect her.
And the stunt work that goes on when Cuchillo, in quotes, is getting gored by that bull is just incredible. I mean, it looks like it really hurt whoever that was getting tossed around by that bull as Cuchillo is trying to impress the woman. That was really remarkable. And I really like, too, when Van Cleef shows up and he's talking with her, the cross-cutting between his conversation with her and then Cuchillo down in the pig shit and mud with all of the guys around him, and him just trying to turn the situation around, completely helpless, no knives, no guns, but he just uses his words and tries to set these guys against one another and then eventually against Van Cleef and manages to hold the whole situation. And then how Cuchillo even does a little bit of a double cross too, when Corbett's about to walk out the door and he catches his eyes and it's just like, no, there's other guys around here with guns. And really, it's, again, Cuchillo just playing the situation so that he can say he's going around the back and instead just jumps on a horse and off he goes.
Yeah, he even reasons that out with Van Cleef in a later scene verbally. But as Van Cleef pointed out, the two parties needed to be tied up with each other for Cuchillo to escape. So, he did his trickster bit of business.
Yeah, it's so much fun to see him manipulate people and spin the situation in his favor. And it's part of the tension, the fun tension of the film, is how does he get out of each of these things? Throughout all three of these films, there's constantly moments where like, how's he going to get out of that prison? Oh, how is he going to get out of that guy shooting him right there? And then he always manages.
By all three, you mean this film, the sequel, Run Man Run, and then the other one that's considered part of the...
Face to Face. Yeah, it's just
his political trilogy, as it's sometimes called, yeah. Yeah, Sergio Sollima, he just loved the idea, uneasy partnership between an establishment figure and a criminal. Very clear who that is, and Big Gundown, that's an ex-lawman Corbett and Cuchillo in a Eurocrime movie called Revolver. It's a prison warden and again, a criminal. And Run Man Run, it's in Cuchillo, and there's a bounty hunter figure. Not as strong a presence as Lee Van Cleef. But then in Face to Face, it's a school teacher and bandit leader. So yeah, just in love with these ideas of these establishment figures and anti-establishment figures having to form an uneasy alliance.
Yeah, having just seen all the Sabata films, I was reminded by that trope of the white northern type person and then the more gregarious Mexican character. And usually the Mexican character, much like in this, is treated unfairly because they're Mexican. And just there's that racism that goes through the film. And does our character address that? Does he treat the other character with respect? Is Corbett, eventually, does he come around and treat Cuchillo with respect? Yes. But it takes a long time for that. And really, he needs to still be in power. And we do realize that there were situations that we thought Cuchillo had the upper hand, but really Corbett knew exactly what was going on and used that to try to manipulate it more. But it was really one of those, like, who's got the upper hand in this situation? And I love that kind of back and forth that these two characters have, and that they're both such strong leads that it really feels like this film is equally shared by the two, even though, you have Mr. Ugly all over the posters in America, but in other countries you'd see both of their faces on the poster, and it's like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. It is like Face to Face, where you to have the two characters like in the opening credits, like right next to each other. It very much feels like these two gentlemen share the screen equally.
It's the character arc that Corbett has, too, because part of the reason why he doesn't always seem in control early on is because he's starting to doubt. The reason that's prompting him to pursue this guy and arrest him is he's having these doubts that, I'm not sure I believe that guy, and maybe there's something else I should be thinking about. And so, that's part of why that shift in power is also interesting, because we later find out that part of the reason why he doesn't kill him right away, or why he doesn't isn't a little more forceful in apprehending this, because he's kind of having some doubts.
Yeah, this film really sets a precedent for the next 2 years for Lee Van Cleef, because most times in spaghetti westerns, hero is basically an elemental force. Think Clint Eastwood, rather, in Fistful of Dollars or any of the Dollars films. He breezes into town. He's unchangeable. He's unshakable. He's unflappable. But, outside of accomplishing a mission during the film's runtime, he doesn't change. Lee Van Cleef was very different in a lot of his roles. We might be tempted to think that began with For a Few Dollars More, because in For a Few Dollars More, it seems like he's just a purely mercenary bounty hunter. And by the end of the movie, he's revealed that he's on a much more personal mission. But that's just really a shift in the audience understanding and perception of the character. Here, he actually undergoes a change. He begins the film naive about law and order. He begins the film kind of overzealous about law and order, but by the end of the film, his eyes have been opened. He's much more world-weary about the way the world works. He's much more a realist. Next year, he would do Death Rides a Horse, where he begins on what seems like just a personal, bitter quest of revenge. And by the end of the film, he has shifted over, and there's a younger guy who is after the same baddies. He helps this younger guy in a much more righteous quest of revenge. Then the next year, Beyond the Law, Lee Van Cleef begins the movie not only as a criminal, but an absolute goofball. I mean, the guy is just goofy. I fast forward for the first 2/3 of the movie when I watch that film. And by the end of the film, he's not only a sheriff, but he's also his stoic hero character. That's what I term, these three films, they always end up with Van Cleef as a stoic hero. He starts off the movie as either less stoic or less heroic, but then ends up the stoic hero in the end of all three. I really love a movie called The Grand Duel, where it's clear that Van Cleef's character has made this change, but it happens in the backstory. It happens in the exposition. The change has already occurred before the movie. So we get to spend the whole time. It's very realistic that this character would have evolved, but we don't actually have to watch the evolution. You raise an interesting point, Mike, but really half the film, Big Gundown, occurs in Mexico. So I don't know that Lee Van Cleef, has big, bad, evil white man power over Cuchillo down in Mexico. I think the main point is that Cuchillo is poor and he stood with Juarez. They allude to a couple of times that he stood with the revolutionaries, and it was a failed revolution, so it made him just especially vulnerable having a target pinned on him.
Well, you get a number of references from the Mexican law enforcement of, whether your war is as dogs or an American, like, I don't care if you guys want to fight it out between the two of you, just kind of like, don't bother me. But you're like, I don't care about either of you. I don't like either of you, and kill each other if you want.
Cuchillo, for so much of this film, is one step ahead, and it almost seems like he's rubbing it into Corbett's face. Like when Corbett goes to see a prostitute and his sheriff's star is on the prostitute's garter, and it's like, oh my God, that's just amazing. But when Corbett goes to a monastery, and Cuchillo had been there, and there's this man called Brother Smith and Wesson, and I really like the scene with those two together, and this whole idea of, if you cross that line, you're going a step too far. Like crossing the line as far as going to Mexico and crossing that line as to continuing to pursue Cuchillo. If you do that, you will not be able to come back from that. And I really appreciate that little exchange that these two characters have. And yeah, once he makes that transition and goes to Mexico, I mean, really the film starts to really change there, especially because that's what tips off Broxton to bring he and his clan and the Baron, the Austrian Baron, down to Mexico. And that's really what sends up a big red flag for Corbett, which is just like, why are you doing that? Why are you coming down here with all of this stuff? Like, this isn't right. And I think that's really what starts to fuel that fire even more than it might have been fueled before, that things aren't right here.
That scene did have an English dub, the monk scene, but it's not in the theatrical cut that I first became aware with. So that must have been like dubbed for like the UK or something like that. Grindhouse did put it into their expanded theatrical cut. That's what they called it. So it's just not even a film I'm that familiar with, because I watched the version I fell in love with.
Well, and again, that goes back to that Catholicism. You've got, a priest talking to him about, you don't have a right to cross this border, and kind of giving him this sense of, there's this morality going on that you have to kind of pay attention to. And then that monk, that priest is, an interesting character too, because he obviously has a backstory to himself as well. And I think that, part of the notion I like there is this sense of, you can lead any kind of life and you can end up with some sort of redemption. So it's almost like he's telling him, hey, you can cross that line if you want to, but there's another choice you can make for maybe a better, more moral life, or, a better path to take. And again, I think that's interesting that they emphasize those kind of choices within these films.
Mike, you were earlier talking about the two leads being true, honest, shared leads. I guess, I don't know, what would you think? If I had to estimate, I would say it was probably 60% of the scenes or screen time was from Van Cleef's point of view, and about 40 was from Cuchillo's point of view. Is that about how you guys, or do you think it was 50-50?
I think it's probably more 60-40. It might even be 55-35, because there's also that moment where we break from the two characters and we're privy to things that neither of them are, where we have Broxton talking to his daughter and talking to, is it Shem or Shemp? I kept writing Shemp in my note.
I think it's Shep, right? Shep is in Shep Gordon, maybe? I think.
There you go. And that is very interesting, that it's just like, hey, this isn't a marriage. This is a land transaction. This is a deal for you to be down payment, basically, on this idea of a railroad and this idea of the land that I need to own. So when we shift away from those two guys, I mean, we're very much in a privileged spot. And then also getting to see Shep really eyeing that one servant girl.
He does more than I.
Yeah.
He lays some hands on her, yeah.
For people who I guess everybody's seen it, or you've encouraged everybody to see it but for a common frame of reference, and I don't mean this to be a controversial or artisan comment, but for a common frame or modern frame of reference, he's kind of a Hunter Biden type character, because he is into forbidden pleasures and it is coming at the liability of his powerful father. That's how I think about Shep now.
Powerful father-in-law. Because that father, he wants to get rid of that son-in-law. He's like, man, you're baggage.
But Shep's the father is powerful too, right? Both.
We don't see him.
One, well, we see him at the wedding. I think one has the land and one is building the railroad. Isn't that the marriage of convenience there?
And then when he goes down to Mexico, he's got the other guy who he's making the deal with so that the railroad can go through to Mexico. Is that correct? Yeah, the guy with the really incredibly tall sombrero, where it's just like, are you making up for something with that?
The balance of screen time between the guys, that's what makes the movie work for me. And that's why I think Run Man Run, the sequel, is, just kind of a weaker film, because that movie is like 85-15 in favor of Cuchillo. And, it's not that it's too much Cuchillo. It's just, there's not a strong balance for him. And it just feels kind of, instead of feeling like a chase movie like this movie does, even though technically Run Man Run is a chase movie, that feels more like a road movie. It feels like, road movie, proto road movie without cars, because Cuchillo's just encountering fun people along the way and stuff.
And a little bromance going.
Well, everything in this movie feels like it's so perfectly together. I mean, Cuchillo has a little musical motif to him. The Baron has the Fur Elise that he's playing on the piano, and that comes back later. And then, Corbett's got his own theme. And then when they're chasing Cuchillo through the cane fields, we hear Cuchillo's theme mixed with the other theme. And then when we finally get to the big gundown of the title towards the end, we even get Fur Elise coming back when it's the Baron about to do his thing. And it's just like, this is really nice. So it really feels like they put a lot of time and a lot of energy into this. And I know I read Alex Cox's review of the film, and his one complaint, well, actually he had two complaints. One was the singer for the theme song. And maybe, especially when she comes back right at the very, very end, when Cuchillo's saying, never, never, and then she comes back in like really super loud. That, and then that the gunfight between the Baron and Corbett takes a little less time than maybe it should. Maybe it should have been built up a little bit more, especially when he's talking about the importance of the eyes. And Cox was just like, let's get some of those good, the bad, and the ugly close-ups in there, because that would be really good. But Sollima, I don't think that he shoots that way. He didn't have those big face moments nearly as much as the other Sergio, or one of the other two big Sergios of Leone.
Well, and maybe that's also a bit of the irony of it, because obviously the Baron is not as good. I mean, from our point of view, we side with Van Cleef, and we think that he would be the better gunfighter in that situation, and that the Baron is, trying to do this scientific thing and figuring out how to outsmart the other guy with this special holster, and I'm going to figure this out. And Lee Van Cleef is just like, yeah, no, just do it. Like, you just... there's even a point when the Baron pulls the gun on him to show how fast he can, and he barely even flinches in a reaction. And, it's just a moment where you're going, he seems to have more mastery of this kind of situation than the Baron does.
Yeah, Van Cleef early on in that wedding scene establishes, and this is the kind of stuff I like, because I'm attracted to masculine cinema, traditional masculinity in cinema. I don't like hyper macho bullshit. And so when the Baron is bragging about all his gunplay skills and stuff, and Lee Van Cleef's like, I stopped playing with guns when I was a boy at 12. That's the kind of stuff I dig, is like, you use a gun as a tool, but you don't, fetishize it and stuff, as the Baron clearly did. I think all these gunfights in these spaghetti westerns, they were all looking for novelty. And I think the novelty in the Lee Van Cleef one is the fact that he offs his dueling partner while he's rolling down. I think that's great. As he's, rolling down and repeatedly facing the Baron, he gets off shot after shot and takes out his enemy. I think that was the novelty or the gimmick there. And if you think about it, Clint Eastwood was like a ringmaster of the final duel in For a Few Dollars More, which was between Lee Van Cleef and Jean-Marie Volonté. In this one, Lee Van Cleef is like the ringmaster between Cuchillo and Shep in the penultimate gun duel in this film.
Well, and what I like about that duel with the Baron, too, is, the Baron's kind of focusing on this idea of I can draw faster than you. And Van Cleef's thinking, I just need to kill you. And if it takes 2 bullets or 3, or from a standing position or rolling down the hill, it doesn't really matter. Like, it doesn't have to look good or, whatever. I just need to be effective in what I'm doing. And I don't have to do the math to figure that out. I'm just going to take you out. And there's a very kind of just like no nonsense efficiency to the way he does it, as opposed to this Baron's kind of.
Well, the Baron even says that speed makes up for accuracy, and he ends up shooting Van Cleef, but he shoots him in the shoulder. So it's like, yeah, no, you
missed.
Your accuracy is what cost you your life, sir.
And considering that Van Cleef's already been shot in the shoulder earlier in this film, maybe it went past right through the same wound. Right. Maybe Van Cleef barely even felt it. Another couple of things about the sequence leading up to the climax. I'm not into over-analysis of films or overly deconstructing them, but what they call the cane field, that kind of looks like reeds to me. That doesn't look like proper. It looks almost like wheat. But I do notice they call it cane fields. And, you think about where is cane? It's not even really in the United States properly, but it is in Cuba. And who comes from Cuba? Well, Tomas Milian, the guy who's supposed to be. So I did think of it. That was coincidental. Also, the piece of music that's kind of become famous from this, a piece of instrumental music that goes. That's played during that sequence. And a few years ago, I rewatched Wolfgang Petersen's In the Line of Fire, starring Clint Eastwood, scored by Ennio Morricone. And what was the title theme of that? It's a discipline or a medium that allows for some recycling, and Morricone certainly did it there. But, it's another tie between Van Cleef and Eastwood.
Yeah, I've had a couple folks point out, like, oh yeah, he was pretty much recycling himself here, and here, and send over little clips of stuff. And it's like, okay, yeah, it's not as bad as James Horner for me, so I'm okay with it. And plus, the man put together, 100 scores easily. I mean, pretty much everything that I've watched this month, with maybe the exception of one film, The Bullet for the General, I think was not scored by him, though there was musical supervision by Morricone. And there was one point where I was just like, wow, this sounds like Morricone. Like maybe he just stepped in here and did this. But for the most part, I mean, he is the soundtrack of spaghetti westerns.
Maybe on the Grindhouse DVD, Sergio Sollima said something like, my only complaint with Ennio Morricone is he scored too many movies.
No, there's no such thing as him scoring too many movies. Well, and if you're a little tone deaf like me, you can't recognize that music is being reused because it kind of just goes right over my head. Although I do think the theme song is played at that plantation party, right? In the background? Okay. Because I'm not very good at identifying music, and I'm going like, yeah, that.
But that was very clever. I thought that was a great touch. I thought that was the instrument. It worked with the instrumentation too.
Yeah, that was very, very nice. And yeah, that chase of after they get through the quote unquote cane fields, the chase of Cuchillo through those landscapes, those incredible landscapes. And there's a lot of times where he's in the foreground and the pursuers are in the background, and he'll be hiding like in a cubby or, just like a rock formation. And it's almost like he's part of the landscape. And I really kind of appreciated the way that they were shooting that as well, where it's just like, again, we're privileged. We get to see him as part of this land. And really, he is part of this land because by this point, we're in Mexico and this is his home turf. And the rest of the people are so small and so ineffectual as they're trying to find him through this giant landscape.
Yeah, I mean, it makes him seem like he knows the land better, way better than they do. And he knows where to go and where to hide and how to use everything in his environment to his advantage. And they don't.
If you want to see a whole wall-to-wall film of that, watch the spaghetti western Chado's Land, Michael Winter film with Charles Bronson. Yeah, a lot of people say it's a Vietnam allegory.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
I can see that.
Before I was ever even able to see this film, your only way to learn about these movies was back in the 90s. That is, pre-internet 90s was through, the various books that have been made on spaghetti westerns. And I can't remember if it was Chris Frayling or, one of these books, but it said that the chase through the cane field was every bit as powerful and beautiful as the Ecstasy of Gold sequence in Good, Bad, and the Ugly. And when I saw it, it was like the music's great and all, but yeah, it I think you were right, Mike. I think once he gets out of the canes and he's, in the rockier terrain, I think that's, more powerful imagery.
Well, I think he's a very different filmmaker from Leone, and he has a background, or he had a background in documentary filmmaking, and I just don't think he had the same kind of visual flourishes. He had really a great sense of framing and using images, but not that same kind of flourish that Leone had, that kind of really epic grandeur that he had. It's a different style. So yeah, I think the two scenes are radically different, and have a different impact. But, the Ecstasy of Gold one is much more of this kind of dizzying, heady rush.
Yeah, it almost exists for its own sake.
Yeah, exactly. I'd seen the film many times, but for the first time I saw it at the Cinema Dome, in the huge screen, and that scene played so much differently. I mean, it was like you physically get dizzy and high off of watching it on such a huge screen. It was wonderful.
Well, when I think about Leone, I do always think about those close-ups, but I think about the way that he would use those and pepper them in, or just change a shot suddenly. Like there's I think it's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Like we see the landscape and just this wide open vista, and then a gunfighter comes in like from the side and turns right towards us. And so suddenly we're in extreme close up, but it was all one shot. And it's just like, wow, that's amazing. So we've gone from the vista of the land to the vista of this man's face. And it's just like, okay. And you don't see the bottom of the chin. You don't see the top of the head, because you're just getting that widescreen frame of this man's face. And it's just really breathtaking. But yeah, you're not necessarily getting that, but I'm not saying that Sollima can't handle a camera, because he definitely can, and he keeps everything going with this.
Yeah, it's just a different style, Again, I think it's more about his framing. I hate to use it, but the mise en scène, where, it's just how everything's placed in the frame is really exciting and interesting. And Leone just has much more of a flamboyance kind of to it. And it's just two different styles to me. I mean, I love them both.
To really nerd out, that guy who abruptly comes into frame is Al Mulock. He is one of 4 spaghetti Western actors I can name off my count on my fingers that committed suicide. He actually committed suicide on the set of Once Upon a Time in the West. In his wardrobe, he defenestrated himself and died. I look at the Italians and how these guys could basically work as much as they want. They were in one movie, it becomes a hit or even a moderate hit, or they just go on from film to film and film. And, filmmaking is such a desperate scramble now, which it just demoralizes you. And I look at these guys and it's like, why are y'all killing yourselves? What do you got to be sad about? Doing the most glamorous thing possible as a living.
Yeah, I know we talked about Frank Wolf when we were talking about The Great Silence, and it's like, oh, wow, I can't believe that he killed himself just a few years after that, and after Once Upon a Time in the West. And it's like, again, yeah, you had everything going for you. You were all over the place. You're an American actor in these spaghetti westerns, and you're able to dub your own voice, and we can hear you, and he's narrating documentaries and things. It's like, oh, man. I mean, we're going to talk about a lot more familiar faces as we talk about Run Man Run and Face to Face, because it really feels like Sollima really liked certain actors and he would come back to them time and again. And it's kind of a reunion of sorts as we go through the rest of these films. So let's go ahead and we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back after these brief messages.
Sick of those trivia podcasts that you don't even understand how to operate and they just have too many levers and buttons?
There's got to be a better way.
Now there is, with Good Job Brain, an offbeat quiz show and trivia podcast that makes learning new things easy and fun.
I just learned that artificial vanilla flavoring sometimes comes from the anal glands of a beaver, and now I can never shake that mental image. Thanks, Good Job Brain.
Good Job Brain is available for the low price of just 4 easy payments of free. It's a podcast.
Good Job Brain is part of Airwave Media and available on all podcast apps. Operators are standing by.
Dark Destinations is a travelogue podcast unlike any other. Cities and towns distinguished by their oddity and the fact that they don't exist. Join us at Dark Destinations, where we explore the most infamous locations to be found in fiction, from Arkham to Zaira and every point in between. We risk life, limb, and our sanity for your listening pleasure. Dark Destinations can be found at fathermalone.com and on iTunes.
It's not easy having a good time, and it's not cheap either. Every week, the projection booth brings you a new show, possibly even two, focusing on all genres of cinema. If you've sat through the 7-hour Conan episode, the 6-hour Star Wars episode, or even the hour-long Superman episode, you know that Mike and his co-host put forth a lot of work into researching the movies, tracking down the interview subjects, and putting together one of the best podcasts on the internet. Now I'm asking you if you can repay all that hard work by giving back to the projection booth. The show has a Patreon fundraiser at Patreon. That's patreon.com/projection booth. You can donate as little as $1 a month. That's $12 a year. At least 50 great shows and 2 terrible ones. That's the price of 2 matinee tickets. Now isn't the projection booth worth it? Once again, that's patreon.com/projection booth. Donate today. It's the right thing to do.
Run, Cuchillo, run!
Right. Uno, dos. Mira, qué pilote.
Amigos míos, ya lejos me voy a esa guerra cruel. Puede ser que el coraje vendrá, se ocurrirá. Quién sabe si esperanza no habrá, o si el espanto entrará. Pero estén seguros que ese es un canto lindo, dentro de mi pecho, ya.
No hay miedo, mis compañeros, por quien busca la revolución. También la muerte
we are back, and we are talking about the Big Gundown, and we are talking more about Run Man Run, which is not only the name of one of the songs from the Big Gundown, but also the name of the sequel, which came 2 years later, which brings back Cuchillo, though unfortunately it doesn't bring back Jonathan Corbett. And Mike, you touched a little bit on this before, and I definitely agree with you as far as it being so much Cuchillo, not enough of the other characters, and with the Big Gundown, I felt like there was really a lot of forward momentum, and we get some of that forward momentum here, but it feels like it's just a little bit more of a sluggish film than the Big Gundown was.
Well, and also way more comedic. And I don't think that Tomas is playing the character any more comedically. I think just by virtue of having him on screen more, I think it feels like a more comedic film, and it just doesn't work for me as well. It's, it's an enjoyable film. It is nowhere near the classic that Big Gundown is.
Personally, I miss the contrast between Van Cleef and Milian because, again, you've got the stillness of one playing off the kind of antics of the other, and having them together is just a perfect balance in the film. And you don't have that same sort of thing going here because he's kind of jumping from character to character through this. And it does feel on a certain level that this is kind of paralleling a lot of what's going on in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly on a much smaller scale. But there's this, looking for gold and just the same kind of sensibility that this one feels less fresh and original to me, whereas Face to Face and Big Gundown, I felt more engaged by them.
I mean, there's some good comedy at the beginning when he's going through this town that looks like it's abandoned, and he takes some food and he comes out this other door, and then he's right there by a firing line. The title Run Man Run is not a mistake because he is running through so much of this, whether it be him running away from this firing squad or he's in town and has to get from one place to another, and he has managed to win a bet and is running away from there, and these soldiers are just like, hey, why are you running? And it felt very contemporary. Hey, come back here. I want to kill you because you're running away from me. There's that, I guess he was a former sheriff. Now he's a bounty hunter. So he's kind of the Corbett.
Total Corbett stand-in. You wonder if they couldn't get Van Cleef back, and so they gave him a new character name or something and minimized his screen time too.
Really minimize the screen time. The guy, there were a few times where I was like, wait, is that the same guy? And it is, but it was just like, oh, okay. He just did not feel like he was there. And then after a while too, it almost feels like there's too many people that are all involved in this. And at the end of the day, it becomes, you talked about it being a road movie, and it's one of these go find the giant W type of a road movie where it's all of these people all converging on this town to find this treasure. And the treasure, in this case, it's interesting because it is going to fuel the revolution. But then when it comes to the revolution, it's like you have all of these different players in there. Who's sincere, who's not, who just wants to get rich off of this thing. And it becomes a little muddled just because there are so many people that are all desperate to get to the town, get the gold, and get theirs, and, fuck everybody else.
The other two spaghetti westerns he did, I feel like the politics in Face to Face are more developed and interesting and has a much richer quality, and the kind of pure kind of Western tropes are better in Big Gundown. And then this one is kind of straddling both. It's kind of this finding the gold. It's kind of about revolutionaries. It's kind of about, these Western tropes. And it doesn't quite settle in any one way or develop any one of those things to their best potential. So it just feels kind of a little sprawled that, if he took a little more time maybe or something, it felt like it was done quickly and not quite as thought out as the other two, because the other two felt much more well crafted.
Face to Face, I'm so glad that you introduced me to that film, Mike, because I really wasn't familiar with it. And I'm not as familiar with Sollima's work as I probably should be. But yeah, I was very impressed by that, especially having just seen A Bullet for the General. So seeing Gian Maria Valente in that, where he is not necessarily playing the Ramon role, but he looks much more like Ramon from Fistful of Dollars. But in this, he starts off with the short hair, and there's no facial hair whatsoever, and it's that different style of Valente that I really hadn't experienced before. And seeing the way that he transforms once he goes west, and how it starts off as like a fish out of water story, and then it changes into another story. And I really like the way that one was paced and plotted, and it felt like it was really well put together. And that contrast between he and Tomas Milian just really worked so well. And to see those two powerhouses of spaghetti westerns playing off of each other, and then even adding in William Berger, who we were just talking about a few weeks ago, who played Banjo in the first Sabata film, playing a completely different role. I mean, there are a lot of just incredible scenes in Face to Face.
Yeah, I talk about the uneasy alliances between establishment and anti-establishment characters in Sergio Sollima films, but this is the only one where like they truly flip-flop, because the Jean-Maria Volante teacher character becomes more of a bandit than the Tomas Milian Beauregard character. And speaking of people you also saw in Sabata, blonde-haired actor Linda Veras was also in Run Man Run in a very sizable role, and then small part in Face to Face. Such a small part, you almost kind of wonder what she was doing there. But double check me, make sure I'm not wrong. But I think that was Sergio Sollima's wife for a while.
There's the moment in Run Man Run when Cuchillo comes into a bar, and I think that's probably like my favorite part of the film, is because he comes in, he sees, it's pretty early on, so he sees the Lee Van Cleef stand-in in there, and he thinks, oh, they're after me. And then he's actually there after another guy, and that guy ends up, again, being in Face to Face. He's kind of this blonde guy. He looks a little bit like Mark Pellegrino, and I really like him. And then I like that there's yet another gunman in there, and that Cuchillo can see him through a mirror, and that he's throws this knife, breaks the mirror, and causes all of this gunfire to happen. I really enjoyed that, but I just didn't get enough of that because it felt like that scene was so well put together. And then through the rest of the movie, I'm just like, yeah, okay, this is all right, but it didn't grab me like Face to Face and like The Big Gundown.
That scene was so much fun. Milian is orchestrating a lot of what's going on there. I mean, he makes the small bet, knowing, figuring who's going to win, and then kind of keeping his eye on what's going on in the entire place, and that's fun.
Makes the bet with a stolen
money.
Coin. And then he sees that pile of money that he stole it from, and he's like, I'm thinking, oh, he's just going to steal the rest of it. But no, instead he actually gives back the coin because he made the rest of the money. I was like, oh, that's nice. That was very nice. And I like that his wife was an important character, the Cuchillo wife character, who we saw in the previous film, played by a different actress.
Different actors and different character name. It's a stickler for continuity. That was so disappointing to see, but
maybe he's a bit of a Mormon, and he had a couple of them. He learned from the Mormons.
The Mormons rubbed off on him. Yeah, so Chelo Alonso played the wife in the sequel, and she only acted for a few more years after Run Man Run. And I looked up, I don't know anything about the actress who played Rosita in The Big Gundown, but yeah, she only acted for a couple of years prior. So Rosita actress may have already been out of the biz by the time Run Man Run. Oh, and one more. Okay, you want to get really nerdy with trivia? You correctly said that Run Man Run was a soundtrack cue, the title of a soundtrack cue in Big Gundown, and kind of influenced the name of the sequel. Well, La Resa de Conte, which is the name of the Big Gundown in Italian, that was the name of a soundtrack cue, and for a few dollars more.
That's right. Yeah, I've actually heard people compare the song of The Ecstasy of Gold to the theme from The Big Gundown. I'm like, well, I can kind of hear it, but it's not nearly as striking as some other cues where I'm just like, oh yeah, those are the same cues, definitely. But to me, those two songs can stand on their own very strongly, and they're already incredible the way that Morricone is doing them, but then to hear them orchestrated differently by other artists, it's like, oh wow, this song can really stand up because other people can use it and abuse it, and it won't fade by how powerful it is.
Big Gundown is just, one of the, even though it's a lesser known film than the Dollars films, it's just, one of the high watermarks of Morricone's career.
Well, and then John Zorn used it as the title of one of his albums, where he actually does. It's not really a cover of the Big Gundown. It's almost like an interpretation of the sounds of the Big Gundown. I want to say it's like a 7-minute track, and it has bits of the soundtrack. There's even a little bit of Fur-Elise in there. And then the other parts of it, I think the whole Big Gundown album that he did was all Morricone songs, but with that one, it is the least like a cover, and it's much more of like I hate to use this term, but like a tone poem dedicated to the Big Gundown soundtrack.
Well, he's the free jazz guy, right? John Zorn?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I wouldn't expect him to do any standard cover, but some of the tracks are standard covers.
Yeah, like his cover of the Battle of Algiers is very similar. There's a few others as well where it's just like, okay, yeah. Like I'd say that first track is very misleading because the rest of the tracks on the album are much more straight-ahead covers of Morricone stuff.
Well, this is going to sound very pejorative, but I thought that guy was just noise, man.
What's noise to some is art to others, you know. There's not a whole lot I want to talk about Run Man Run, because even like as I was watching the film, I was like, okay, yeah, this happened and then this happened, and I just kind of ran out of steam towards the end. I was like, yeah, this is playing out pretty much the way that I expected it to.
Well, I do want to point out that a lot of these spaghetti westerns have some very interesting forms of torture. And this one had the crazy putting them on a windmill, which also made me think of Don Quixote. And then there's dynamite in his mouth is another one. And then there were a few other ones too. I can't remember. And then like the soldier tied to a stake with a sign on him. I mean, there's these odd kind of brutal, implicitly brutal scenes. And yeah, the windmill one was crazy.
What was the nationality of the guys who caught up to him at the windmill? I forget. They were French? Okay.
They were supposed to be French, I think.
That's just like a line of dialogue where I was like, did they just say that they're French?
Yes.
And
I think we were supposed to tell by the way they were dressed, because they were like a little frillier than the others. Yeah, nationality is always a strange thing in spaghetti westerns, because there's so many different nationalities of the cast. And then, such an oddity of where things were shot and then where they were supposed to be. And, there's a level of confusion that's...
Well, Mike, if you just saw Return of Sabata and The Big Gundown recently, you've seen your share of redheaded Italians, haven't you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, those McCoy brothers. Then you've got the languages that they're speaking. There was even a moment, Beth, I think, where one person spoke to another in Italian, and then, the whole movie that I saw was in Italian, and then the person was like, what did they say? And I'm like, well, of course you know what they said. They're speaking the same language that you spoke.
I remember, this is a film I love, but the language issue is kind of weird to me, is the Richard Lester's Three Musketeers. So it's all over the place. You've got, an American, Charlton Heston playing the French Richelieu. You've got British actors playing the French Musketeers. But there's a point at which the Musketeers come to rescue the Queen's honor, and Buckingham is there, and he says something in English. And then the four Musketeers look at each other and say, like, he sounds British. And you're like, wait, you all sound British. But for some reason, Richard Lester manages to pull that film off. It's like one of those examples of like, that was completely wrong. All the accents were wrong. I totally bought into it. But sometimes spaghetti westerns are like this too, where it's like people are speaking and then suddenly they're referencing that you're American and you're not. And you're like, oh, but they all sound the same. The one thing that I thought was kind of interesting, and again, it's not nearly as well developed in this as in Face to Face, but there is a reflection of Sollima's own politics that are coming through in this sense of the revolution. And, there's a couple of, I love the fact that the guy in prison and they say, oh, who is that? It's like, he's really dangerous. He's a poet. I mean, I just love that words could be so dangerous. And, they talk about the newspaper that he would print. And there's also kind of a fun reference when there's some guy in the bar spinning a story and he says, yeah, I'm talking about this revolutionary, but there's no, it's like the disclaimer on movies. It's like there's no connection to any person living or dead. And it's almost like saying like, yeah, I'm going to make some references here, but don't, to the censors, to the Italian censors, like, don't read anything into this, really. I'm not really saying anything about about Italian politics. This is, and there's that fun sense, too, in all of these films. And a lot of the spaghetti westerns is, this was a really tumultuous time politically in Italy. And to directly criticize the government or certain things that were going on would have gotten some of these filmmakers, and did get some of these filmmakers, in trouble. And part of, I think, the appeal of doing these westerns is, no, it's not about Italy. It's America in the South in the, whatever, 1600s, 1800s, whatnot. And it has nothing to do with Italian politics, but it has everything to do with Italian politics. And, I think part of what makes the spaghetti westerns really interesting too is that they were reflecting that kind of moral ambiguity of the time, because the old American westerns and a lot of the TV westerns that were going on at this time were very black and white with very clear kind of sense of morality. And the spaghetti westerns really gave us those anti-heroes, those kind of morally ambiguous characters who were not necessarily all bad, not necessarily all good, might have their own moral code, but might not be necessarily on the side of the law. And a lot of that, I think, reflected what was going on in Italy at the time. We were fortunate enough here in San Diego. We ran a series of spaghetti westerns and also a series of Italian genre cinema. And we have an Italian film festival here run by artistic director Antonio Iannota. And he teaches classes on Italian cinema. And it was so great to have him come in and really talk about the politics of the time. And, there's stuff that totally American audiences would not get in some of these films in terms of the political connections, the very specific political connections that were being made. And it was really great to have him there talking about some of this. I wish I could remember some of the brilliant things he pointed out, but there is a really interesting sense. And, in the 60s, especially the late 60s, there was a lot of political upheaval around the globe in, 67, 68, that films all over the place were reflecting. And I really think that these spaghetti westerns, in a not an in-your-face sort of way and not in a very kind of overt sort of way, were dealing with a lot of that ambiguity and unrest and uncertainty that people, especially I think young people, were feeling at the time. You can't trust those in the establishment. You can't trust the government. You can't, trust people with money. And I think there's a line at the end of Big Gundown where Lee Van Cleef has said something, and the Braxton character says like, yeah, you're way too smart to be a senator, or, way too honest. That's one thing I've always enjoyed about film and pop culture is like, you can put these films into this bigger social context that makes them interesting and makes them timeless in an interesting way to look back and say like, yeah, this is what it was reflecting, and look at how they did it, and look at how they did it in a entertaining way instead of, a very kind of academic way.
In Italy specifically, you're right, there was a lot of tumult around the world in the 60s, but in Italy specifically, most of the actors that I've worked with that worked there during that time said that it was a really quaint, beautiful, lovely, calm, tranquil place up until, there was a bombing in either 68 or 69 that really triggered the years of lead in Italy. And so most of the spaghetti westerns from the classic periods got in under the wire, I think, with a kind of a nicer, less hostile Italy. But you're right. Like if you just saw the third Sabata film, Return of Sabata, a lot of people have interpreted the Irish characters there to be a thinly veiled Italian mafia.
So many of these filmmakers probably grew up either during World War II or shortly thereafter when, the country was just in tatters. I'm sure a lot of them were very familiar with Mussolini and his politics. So, just we were talking yesterday about Bullet for the General and just, the communist stuff that was going through that film. And it's just like, okay, yeah. Mike, when did spaghetti westerns really start to fade, and when did the other genres of Italian films start to pick up?
Well, spaghetti westerns, the first wave of them were starting to fall off and were, revived by the comedic take on the spaghetti westerns. But just to use Van Cleef as an example, he made $400,000 as a salary on Sabata. And then a couple of years later, starring in Bad Man's River and Captain Apache in 71. Sabata was 69, and in Bad Man's River and Captain Apache, he made $150K each for those. The budgets and the salaries were declining in rapid fashion between 69 and 71. Trinity in the early 70s, that gave a new lease on life to the spaghetti westerns. But 72 and 73 were the first big years that the poliziotteschi really took off, the Eurocrime fad, which were the Italians' takes on films like Dirty Harry and The Godfather. They did those pretty reliably between like 72 and 80. That became the dominant action genre.
And then we had Giallo.
Did Van Cleef cross over into the Eurocrime films?
Very stubbornly, he stuck with the Western. He did make 3 Eurocrime movies, but stubbornly, he stuck with the Western, and he stuck with Italy too long. He really should have, by the late 70s, he said, what am I doing? I need to get back into Hollywood, get back into American TV. And so he tried, but he really waited too late.
I mean, is that what kind of led us to like Master Ninja and those kind of things?
He had a pacemaker. He had a bad heart episode and had a pacemaker installed in 82. And so he was, even further out of the running for real action stuff. The Master was, a good way to put him in a ninja suit and have him doubled very easily because, it's easy to double guy in wearing head to toe pajamas. So, and, like, what was it? Like 1984, he did a movie called Codename Wild Geese, and he's supposed to be running. And he's shot from the waist up, and I notice he's walking but pumping his arms as if he's running. So poor guy, this aging action star who had a pacemaker and really couldn't hack it. He had the mean face of a tough guy, and so he just stuck with those kind of roles.
Seems like he should have been behind a desk pulling strings at that point, just like the guy behind the guy when they open up the door at the end and he's Mr. Big there.
Well, he kind of had a mostly seated role for his last film role, and kind of like John Wayne in The Shootist. John Wayne's character dying of cancer in The Shootist right before John Wayne dies of cancer in real life. Lee Van Cleef's character in his last film role dies of a heart attack right before Lee died of a heart attack.
Run Man Run has its qualities. There are a few scenes that I found interesting. And yeah, you're right, Beth. There's a lot of torture in there, especially if you like seeing Tomas Milian hanging from his arms. There's a lot of that in the film. That happens a few times. But yeah, I would say, notwithstanding, I think it's a wig that Milian is wearing in Face to Face. Notwithstanding that, I'd say that Face to Face is definitely a far stronger film. And it's interesting that it was just a year before. It feels like Run Man Run was many years later. It was just such a weaker entry in the series. I mean, especially because the Big Gundown is what it is. Face to Face is super strong. And then Run Man Run almost feels like an afterthought. But yeah, Face to Face, again, thank you, Mike, for bringing that one to my attention, because that one was just really, really riveting.
Well, Run Man Run almost feels like he did the other 2 films, and then a studio or a producer said, I think we could get some more mileage out of that character if we made another film now. And he was kind of like, all right, if you really want, all right, it's a paycheck and I'll do it. And it was almost like those franchise films where you make them after the point of everybody really having an interest in them. And it felt like an afterthought. But yeah, Face to Face, thank you so much. I had not seen it before, and I loved it. And I loved it because it really did have this kind of rich social and political commentary going on in it. And I think this reflects, something that was very prominent in Italy, which is this sense of like the intellectual elite and the working class, and the contrast between the two, and kind of the distrust. And the characters were fascinating because you have this character who's this professor, this academic who's sickly and, retiring from teaching to go off to, warmer climates to hopefully get better. And,
not only sickly, but terminal, right?
Well, he keeps saying that he could die. But they never really, the one guy told him, he says, no, you'll go down there and you'll breathe some clean air and you'll be fine. And he's like, no, I could be going there, for my death or whatnot. But, him in sharp contrast to the Milian character, who's, a man of action and, very vigorous. And And it's an interesting contrast because they both kind of cross paths and each venture into the other's kind of territory to change. One, Milian, I think, changes for the better, and the professor changes for the worse. But I thought it was a really fascinating look at these two contrasting people. And again, I think that's what works in this and Big Gundown, is having Milian in sharp contrast to someone else. I think that really helps the films play much better.
The one thing that I do not buy in Face-to-Face, because, I know it's tricky to show a character, basically doing 180. It has to be gradual to be credible, the transition. I didn't buy that his first real egregious act was to rape that girl. That just seemed like, for a milquetoast professor, just to violently sexually assault some woman, and especially for it to be the woman of a guy in your gang who's possessive over her, it didn't ring true to me.
It was a bit of a jump.
Yeah, definitely.
I actually had to go back and rewatch the scene because I thought, did I miss something? Because he just suddenly starts punching her, not slapping her, punching her. And I was going, was I not paying attention to something she did before?
Yeah, the violence against women in this film is a little much.
It's not even really motivated in that case, I didn't think.
But in the scene after, she's shown smiling like it was all okay. Doesn't make any sense. The only character that kind of comments on it is the tomboyish girl who says, and today I saw that some men take women against their will. And then, that woman kind of slinks out of the bar, and then she gets beat up again by her boyfriend that is jealous. And then she ends up going with the professor after and dumping. It was like that poor female character was just beaten and bounced around and then has to die.
The death of the little kid really got me in the big robbery that they have going. And when he's so proud that he can read, and that he ends up reading this note and reading it out loud, which is just like, hey, the bank is being robbed right now, and you need to go down and get this posse, and da-da-da. And then when Milian hears that, he's just like, no, give me that back. And yeah, those robbers come out of the bank and just lay that kid down. I'm like, oh man. And you can really see on Milian's face that it's very much affecting him. And I was like, yeah, I can see why, this was not a good thing. So it does present a lot of morally ambiguous scenes where you're just like, okay, yeah, this is not the way that this is supposed to be going. But luckily our characters do get to a different point by the end of the film.
There's the scene before the professor turns kind of darker, where they find the money in the letters, and he's gathering it up like, great. This just fell into my lap. I have money now. And then the professor starts reading the letter about, the parents who sold their house or their farm or something so that the son could have money. And Milian's like, stop reading. I don't want to hear that. Cause now it makes now the money's kind of tainted and I'm not going to feel good just taking it. And the professor says, yeah, if you listen to this, then suddenly you have to think about what you're doing and how you feel about what you're doing. And it's going to change you. And it does change him. And then the professor changes, but in the opposite direction. He kind of gets this weird bloodlust after a certain point and wants to kill people. And he's like, I just had to kill people.
In my Eurocrime documentary, I ask a lot of my interviewees why the killing of kids in Italian cinema. If a kid dies in an American movie back then, that had to be a big deal. You could not do that lightly. But Italian cinema, for some reason, killing a kid was just one of the thrills of the movie. And so I ask a lot of my interviewees why that was almost a fetish for them. And the only one that came up with a good answer to me was a director named Mario Caiano. And he said that it's because the Italian mothers dote over their kids so much that, that was the thing that you could really, be guaranteed that would push a button.
There's a lot of interesting social and political commentary going on in that one town where there's the gunfight, and you have the rich guy in the hotel overlooking the whole thing, keeping his hands perfectly clean, but watching things going on that he sort of has a hand in. And then while the gunfight's going on, you see all these establishments that I think have his name on it. It's like Taylor's Saloon and Taylor's Bank, and like the sense of class and ownership and power, I think, comes through sometimes subtly like that, where, you know, it's in the background. You can notice this if you want, or you could, you know, it can pass you by. But I think that Sollima is very interested in kind of exploring that class difference and also just that ideological difference between some of these characters. Valente was also in Investigation of a Citizen Above Suspicion, which again is another film that's really politically charged in terms of its commentary. And I think he was an actor who let his politics kind of dictate some of his choices in his films. And that character is fascinating because he really, talk about character arcs. I mean, he goes through a incredible change from the beginning to the end of this film.
Valente later looked back at his two Sergio Leone films and kind of regretted them, or looked down his nose at them as being lesser because they weren't, you know, there was not a political overtone. So my final word on Face to Face is there's a member of Beauregard's gang played by an actor named Jose Torres, and he's the real mean-faced looking guy. And Jose Torres was a big character actor in spaghetti westerns, turns up in a lot of them, Death Rides a Horse, for instance. He is in The Big Gundown also as Paco Molinas, and you may remember Paco Molinas as the stiff across a horse that Corbett rides into town with. And, you know, there's a scene where Lee Van Cleef briefly lifts his head and you get to see Jose Torres's face. But I always assume, because as we have acknowledged, there are multiple cuts of The Big Gundown, I always assumed I would see more of Jose Torres's character in some longer cut. But I never have. And again, it's weird because he was a pretty big character actor and he basically just plays a stiff laid across a saddle.
Maybe there's some scene on the cutting room floor somewhere.
That's a really good point, because there is that whole thing of like, oh yeah, here you go, who's Cuchillo? And it's like, no, that's not him, that's this other guy. But there's also when Cuchillo rides out from that Queen Bee type lady's plantation, ranch, I think it's like the next cut is Corbett with Cuchillo tied behind him, like leading him while he's on his horse. And I'm just like, well, wait a second. How did that happen? Because Corbett was still back at the ranch when Cuchillo was riding off. So it felt like there was a cut scene there. And then even between the cane fields and that next bit of chase, it's like there's a really abrupt music break right there. And it's just like, I wonder what happened here, too. I don't know if that was just part of the restoration or what was going on. But yeah, it feels like there might be more to The Big Gundown that we haven't seen yet. All right, guys, let's go ahead and take another break, and we're going to play a preview for next week's show.
A golden bullet. When the bullet turns red, the general will be dead. El Chuncho, the bandit. El Nino, the gringo. Side by side, they killed for what they believed in. Gold. El Santo, the Holy One. What the Lord giveth, he took away. Adelita, the woman. She gave aid and comfort to the enemy, then blasted him to pieces. The general, he needed many guns. He got one bullet. A golden bullet. A bullet for the general.
That's right. We are wrapping up Spaghetti Western Month with a look at A Bullet for the General. Until then, I want to thank this week's co-hosts, Beth and Mike. So, Beth, what is going on with you?
I just got done relaunching my podcast, and so I'm pretty excited. It's got a slightly different format. We've got a few new segments in it, and the big change is I'm doing a companion video to each podcast, which is called Geeky Gourmet, where I show you how to make a themed food or drink to go with whatever the topic is. And I have to say that I have done themed food for spaghetti westerns when we did our spaghetti western series, and we actually served some chocolate spaghetti for one screening, actually. So, but yeah, it combines all the things I love, which is movies and food, and then putting those two things together for an audience, is a lot of fun. So the podcast is Cinema Junkie, and you can find that at kpbs.org/Cinema Junkie. And, yeah, so I'll be cooking and talking about movies.
Didn't George Costanza combine something similar? No, that was Food and Sex.
His favorite salt and meats. And Mike, the busiest man in the South, what are you up to lately?
I'm just on Blu-ray treadmill until something changes in the industry and stuff and allows me to push the big projects out. The Blu-ray treadmill is actually probably where I belong because, very finite deadlines, finite to just be able to push out projects of reasonable length. Neither of these have been announced, but by sheer coincidence, I am working on a Lee Van Cleef title, and I'm also working on a Sergio Sollima title, but neither have been announced, so I can't announce them. And they're two different titles. Van Cleef is not in the Sollima film.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show, folks. Thanks to everybody for listening. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projection booth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the world.
pensando alguma coisa e fedeu as coisas.
Pô, mas o negócio tava bom, bicho. O negócio tava bom, só quando ele tava tão entupido.
Quem diria, hein? Greta Garbo acabou de irajar, hein?
É, mas eu tava falando pra você, né? Depois que eu passei a me sentir, aí o negócio ficou diferente. Jorjão!
Vai, garoto!
Fala a verdade.
Isso tá bom.
Não, nem a cerveja que não saiu. Ô, Ciro, tira a mão do meu bolso.
Agora um arame ia pegar dentro, ia pegar um gordurame depois, um arame não ia mal.
É pecado, Duduca! Agora não come na cabana carioca, Duduca, que tu vai pesar mais 10 quilos.
Olha, depois já viu, né?
Olha aí,
gestão dá certo.
Não, isso aí o quê?
Agora também, velho?
made it to the end of this episode of The Projection Booth. And as the end credits roll, we wanted to thank you, the listening audience. Here at The Projection Booth podcast with Mike White, host extraordinaire,